journey has been for me personally as well, and kind of homes that I have got from this. That's my lab. I'm at IISER Pune, as Mamani mentioned, and my lab works on cell matrix adhesion. We study different aspects of cell adhesion in this context, and this is just to set you up for where I'm coming from. I did my PhD here in India and then went abroad for a postdoc for a few years, and then came back as a Ramalinga Swami Fellow, and then a Welcome Trust Fellow at IISER Pune, and I've been there since. As I mentioned, a lot of this is personal opinions, so you have to take it with a pinch of salt, right? And I'm going to try and briefly tell you things that I have learned over the last 10, 12 years of going through this process, and I've kind of tried to put this in specific categories that I thought were important for my journey. As Professor Vindran introduced, YIMs, it's the first young investigator meet, or the version of the young investigator meet, was held in Boston in 2009, even before the one in India. And it's this meeting in Boston that I went to. And I went to by chance because somebody pointed it out to me saying, "You're thinking of going back, why don't you go attend this thing?" And I had the chance to meet Shashi for the first time there. And everything, kind of fell in place as a result. The idea of picking the right institute for you when you're thinking about this, I think, is one aspect I want to cover. The process of starting a lab, setting up a lab, and sustaining the lab, right? And I kind of split this up when I think about it, because in my head they are really distinctly different things. And then there is this process of kind of thinking and enjoying your work as a team, as a lab, not just you individually. As I was putting this together, my son, who's 11 now, was looking at these pictures of me on my website, and he noticed that one of the things he pointed out is that I seem to be very serious to begin with, and seem to be more happy now, which I think is a good sign. I didn't realize it till he pointed it out. He said, "You realize you look very serious at the when you started your lab," and so it probably is reflective of this journey. I think that you kind of learned to have fun doing this, and despite the challenges that it throws at you. What I've done is I've kind of broken this down to things that matter to me, and the hope here is that some of this may matter to you as well. And that's what I'm trying to kind of put down. So for me, when it came to picking the right institution, I think the thing to consider is what is it that you're looking for in the institution, right? This really matters. It varies depending upon different people. I think your requirements need not be the same. For me, for example, an undergraduate teaching institution is something I wanted to be a part of. It's something that I knew right from the beginning, that I want to be associated with a place that also does undergraduate teaching. And this was instrumental in me deciding to come to IISER as well. The city you want to be in, I think for a lot of people, this may seem very trivial, but I think it's important to consider this, in my opinion. Now, sometimes it's not possible to. I think you're going to places where the jobs are, and you don't have the flexibility of picking a city in which the job you want is. But if you do, it is worth considering. I know people since who've had jobs and left them because of the city, right? And so it is a factor when you think about long-term life, in that particular place. And in my case as well, we had a two-body problem because my wife is a developmental biologist and wanted to come back as well. And so we had to figure out what works for both of us, right? And all these kind of led me to think about what institution to pick per se. It's interesting that when I was looking at resources that are available, India Bioscience has a very nice resource which is an interactive database of life science investigators across the country. You can go look up people in different cities. It gives you a sense of what institutions exist where in the country. It gives you contacts for people that you can maybe write to as well. And so it's a very useful resource to think about. So when I thought about coming to IISER, IISER was still on paper, right? And its appearance on paper itself, I realized, has evolved, right? So if you think on paper is on paper, I think that also undergoes changes. And the institution that I came to came sat in a transit campus. So I joined a transit campus, and the lab was initially initiated there. I think we moved twice before we came to this particular campus that we are on. And so we had this running joke that all the experiments were reproduced in three different locations, and this is something we should report, when we tried to publish those early papers. But that's part of the process. Sometimes it's part of a journey, for a new institution that, campuses will move, and you have to account for that in how you plan and execute what you're trying to do. As far as starting a lab is concerned, I think when I was thinking about what really matters in this context, for me, of course, the space, the physical location of the lab, I realized is really important because, as I said, if you're moving, these are factors that do contribute. The grants, obviously, that you're going to write for. Professor Ravindran just spoke eloquently about, the process, and being able to decide what grants you want to write to, and why, and maybe in what order, might be particularly relevant in the context of starting a lab. If there are labs, there are grants for PIs who are starting labs, which have a window of time, like you have to write in the first year. If that's the case, you have to make sure that those grants go in that window of time. For me, the other important aspect to think when I think of the beginning of the lab has been the people who came together to kind of set this up. And all of this we are eventually thinking will translate into publications, and there are two elements in terms of starting and then setting up of the lab, and sustaining the lab, that I will come to as things that I feel are equally important to consider along with what you do when you start the lab per se. As I said, people make the case. And I think when I joined IISER, the institution existed on paper. The people were there. And I think when I chose to be there, it was largely because of the people, I'll be very honest. And this was a really good decision when I think back about it now, because the place has evolved and has, gotten better. But I think the people I started this journey with are still there, and they're still great friends. And that, I think, has made that journey, despite all the challenges, that much more exciting and interesting to do. The lab, over many years, and I was looking at this when I was putting this talk together, that there are so many people who worked through the lab over extended periods of time. And when you think about people in the lab, remember, that includes you, right? So you are also a member of the lab, and this group of people probably are your biggest resource. And as I saw it, were also my biggest learning and challenge in setting up a lab. And there were important learnings, as I said, about me that I discovered in the process of setting it up, setting a lab up. And those were, I was putting down things that I thought struck me as things that I discovered about myself. One is, I think it's important for you to know your strengths, and know your weaknesses. And I think I was really required to know what is it that I can do well, and what is challenging for me to do. It also meant that I could identify and work on what I wanted to change or improve, right? And this was important, I realized over time. Finding out what excites you about your science. Now, this is almost counterintuitive because you're thinking, well, I am excited about my science. What is there to find out here? I think when you did your science as a graduate student or a postdoc, I think the intent with which you were doing stuff, I think was slightly different versus when you have the freedom to go set up your own lab. And now you have choices that you can make. You can decide to work on things that interest or excite you. There can be things that you think are better funded versus not, and you think that that could be worth picking up as well. So, knowing what is it that you want to work on, I think might need you to think a little bit about. I think maybe a year or two, into setting up of your lab or leading up to you setting up your lab. I think setting personal goals has helped me a lot, right? It could be very small things that you wanted to do well or learn to do well, and there could be many different things, right? And these are something that you can set for yourself to achieve, and those milestones can kind become useful for you to kind of drive, your progress as well. Um, One important thing that somebody told me, which I think more with time has made more and more sense to me, is that working on you is important for your science. Like, how is helping, is you managing things better or learning how to manage them better uh, relevant at all for my science? It looks like it's almost vanity at some level. It isn't, right? And I think what you learn about yourself and how you manage yourself, I think has implications for the science that you eventually do, and for the excitement that you get from the science that you do. There is an interesting cartoon from PhD Comics that talks about where you are and how in life outlook there is this change in uncertainty, and then over a period of time there are more responsibilities and declining health, and things go downhill from there. And in some ways, I think you want to be here all along. And I think at some level, you are able to accomplish it, or at least stretch it as much as you can. When it comes to working with people, which I think has been one of the most important learnings for me, is that I've realized that this is always going to be a mixed bag. People come in all kinds of flavors, right? And they all and it's actually a good thing to have that diversity, right? In the kind of people you work with. Because of this diversity, what will motivate and excite them will vary depending upon the individual, and knowing what they are looking for from the lab, right, has significant impact on how you can make them do well, not just for themselves but also for the lab. One aspect fitting everybody is not necessarily true, and this is something that I've kind of learned to enjoy and cherish, the fact that there is this diversity that exists. And this is cannot be more evident, but for when you're working with undergraduate students. I think for me, because I'm in IISER, there is a strong undergraduate pool of students who come and rotate or spend time in the lab, and I've had a chance to work with many of them over many years. Interestingly, as I was putting this together, I put an asterisk against all of them who are now doing PhDs or have finished a PhD. And it's incredible that more than 60% of who came through the lab have all gone on to do PhDs in really wonderful places. The undergraduate students, for me, was interesting because this is an exciting group of students to work with, and it's something that you should consider when you're thinking about setting up your own labs. They are open to taking very challenging questions, right? They're willing to work on things that a lot of graduate students, I realized, are kind of hesitant, thinking, this may be too risky to work on, so to speak. They're also important buffers in the lab, right? There is a certain excitement to being an undergraduate student, getting a chance to do something, spectacularly cool, right? That it overrides your worry about what if this doesn't work, where does this end up? you're just thrilled to be doing this experiment today, right? And I think we all began that way, but we kind of tend to forget this between everything else that we are trying to do. I think undergrad students for me always remind me of why I started doing what I started doing, right? And for me, that reminder is kind of life affirming, so to speak. It kind of rejuvenates me to go back and do what I'm trying to do. Um, Also, I noticed that mentoring undergraduate students is an incredible learning experience for graduate students. I have had graduate students who worked with undergraduate students and then come back and said, I have whole new appreciation for what you do on a day-to-day basis, right? And so there is an opportunity here as well for other students in the lab to learn, how to work with somebody, and this is a life skill, because it's not like, you're going